I stood at the doorway, holding a tray of food that had gone cold. From the kitchen, I heard her voice, sharp, low, unmistakable. She's just a burden, a chore we never asked for. My son didn't say a word, not in my defense. Not even to soften the blow. I turned, walked back to my room, and sat in silence. That night, before the sun could rise, I was gone. They thought I had nowhere else to go. They were wrong. Before we continue, I'd love to know, where are you watching from today? Comment below. You know, there was a time people used to call me Sunita Didi with such warmth it filled the air like the scent of fresh jasmine. I ran a flower shop on Laxmi Road for 28 years. Not a big one, just a tight corner between a sweet shop and an old tailor's. But it was mine. I opened the shutters every morning at 6, arranged marigolds, trimmed roses, tied together gajras with hands that never trembled back then. People came to me for weddings, births, funerals, even apologies. I knew which colors soothed anger. I could tell what someone needed before they said a word. My husband used to joke that I was more therapist than florist. Ravi, my son, he grew up behind that counter, balancing homework and milk crates. After his father passed, it was just the two of us. I poured everything into making sure he had a future beyond the shop. Private school, tutors, extra milk even when we couldn't afford it for ourselves. He made it. Became an engineer, got a job abroad. And when he called to say he was marrying Ananya, I said a silent prayer of thanks. She was polite when we first met, a bit formal, but educated, well-spoken, ambitious. I thought, good. He found someone who'll walk beside him, not behind. Years passed. They moved back to India, bought a house in a quiet neighborhood. Grandchildren came. 2 little stars in my sky, Arjun and Mira. My knees had started to ache, and sometimes my hands locked up while cutting flowers. But I managed. I always managed. Then came the fall. It was a silly thing. I slipped in the bathroom, hit my head, and woke up in the hospital. Nothing broken, but I was weaker, slower. My doctor said I should stop living alone. It was Ravi who suggested I move in with them for a while. Ananya smiled and said, "Of course, Ma, you'll be comfortable here." And so, I sold the flat, packed what little I had, gave away the plants, closed the shop. At first, everything felt manageable. They gave me a room on the ground floor. I cooked dal the way Ravi liked, told the kids bedtime stories from the Mahabharata, helped fold laundry, even if my fingers hurt. But soon the silences began. Little things. Ananya stopped asking if I'd eaten. She'd turn the volume up on her cereals when I tried to talk. Ravi. He became quieter around me, as if speaking too much would make things worse. I told myself not to overthink, that they were tired, busy, that I was imagining it. But small things pile up until you're buried under them. One day, Ananya told the kids in front of me, "Don't touch Dotty's things. Old people carry germs." Another day, she complained to Ravi that my cooking made the house smell old. But I stayed quiet because I thought love meant patience, that if I gave more, I'd be seen again, heard again. One evening, Ravi came home late. I waited with dinner like I always used to. He walked past me, kissed Ananya on the forehead and said, "Sorry, traffic was a nightmare." She looked at the table, then at me and asked, "Why does she always make so much food? Who's going to eat all this?" He didn't respond, just sat down and scrolled through his phone. I quietly returned to my room, the sound of cutlery and conversation fading as I closed the door behind me. But still, I didn't give up. I bought books for the children, ironed their uniforms, lit incense in the puja corner each morning. I kept trying. I wanted to believe that family would eventually fold me back into its warmth, that I would belong again. But what do you do when home becomes the loneliest place you've ever known? One morning, I looked in the mirror and didn't recognize the woman staring back. Her hair had thinned. Her eyes looked dimmer. She didn't speak much. She existed in the corners. She moved quietly so as not to disturb. She was me, and she was disappearing. That scared me more than being alone. I remembered what my husband once told me the day after his cancer diagnosis. He'd said, "Promise me you'll never stay anywhere you're only being tolerated." Back then, I didn't know what that truly meant. Now I did. I once believed love meant staying, even when it hurt. But sometimes, real love means knowing when to walk away so you can remember who you were before they forgot you. After that mirror moment, I started noticing everything, more than I wanted to. It wasn't just coldness anymore. It was rejection wrapped in politeness, quiet cruelty, the kind that smiles when others are watching and vanishes when you're alone. It began with doors. Doors that were once open now stayed shut. The kids' room, Ananya's home office, even the bathroom upstairs. Subtle signals that said, "This space isn't yours." Ananya started locking up the fridge after 10 p.m., told me, "It's to keep the kids from snacking late, Ma." But I knew. She saw me go in there once, just to get a glass of milk. That's all. The next day, the lock appeared. She changed the house Wi-Fi password too, claimed it was for security. I only used the tablet once a week to call my cousin in Nashik. Ravi never noticed. Or maybe he chose not to. He worked late, came home tired, ate whatever Ananya served, laughed with the kids, sat in front of the TV like life was perfectly normal. I don't think he asked himself what his mother did all day in that little room. Down the hall, I had no key to the house. I had no ATM card. Not that I needed one, they said. "We'll take care of everything." Ananya had smiled when I first moved in, and I believed her. Every day followed the same pattern. Wake up before everyone, make tea, light incense, set out uniforms for the children, watch the house come alive, without anyone really noticing that I was already awake, already there. Some days, the maid wouldn't come. I'd clean quietly, wipe the counters, wash the lunch boxes. Once I accidentally broke a plate, an expensive one apparently. Ananya's face twisted into something cold. She didn't yell, just said, "It's okay, they're old, like some things in this house." I apologized. I always did. One Sunday morning, the kids were watching cartoons. I sat beside them on the sofa. Mira turned to me and whispered, "Mama says you don't have friends." It pierced deeper than she knew. Because she was right. The women I once sipped chai with, neighbors, shopkeepers, other widows, had grown distant. It was hard to keep up when you're no longer part of a community, when your days are reduced to waiting, for mealtimes, for someone to talk to, for your presence to be acknowledged. That same week, I noticed a real estate flyer in the living room. Senior living communities, luxury retirement homes. I pretended not to see it, but at dinner, Ananya brought it up casually. "We should think about your future, Ma. You'd be more comfortable in a place designed for your age. They even have nurses." I looked at Ravi. He didn't look up from his plate. "I'm fine here," I said softly. Ananya's smile didn't quite reach her eyes. "We'll talk about it later." Later never came. But things changed. Suddenly, they stopped asking me to join them on weekend outings. When I asked if I could come along to the mall once, Ananya said, "There's a lot of walking, Ma. You'll get tired." I told her I'd manage. She said, "It's okay. Enjoy the quiet." They left with the kids. I sat on the porch and watered the two sad plants near the gate, a hibiscus and a tulsi, both half alive. A few days after that, I overheard Ananya on the phone with her friend. I was in the kitchen, unnoticed. She just takes up space. I swear to God, I feel like I'm suffocating in my own home. Silence, then laughter. "No, Yar, we haven't told her yet, but soon. She'll have to go. It's not like she has options. I stood there paralyzed, the knife halfway through a carrot. I didn't cry. I felt something harder than pain, something still and terrifying. They thought I was helpless. That old meant powerless, that quiet meant ignorant. They had forgotten who I was. I remembered the small locker in the bank I still held, the investments made long ago in my husband's name, now mine. The flower shop deed I had never truly let go of, even after closing it. I remembered I had options. And something in me, something long buried beneath politeness and patience, rose up like a tide. They assumed I had nowhere to go. But the moment I remembered who I used to be was the moment I stopped asking for permission to live. The week after I overheard Ananya's phone call, the house turned colder, though not in temperature. It was as if everyone had quietly agreed I was no longer someone to include, only someone to manage. Even the children, my sweet Arjun and Mira, started, avoiding my gaze, not out of malice, but confusion. Children mirror what they see, and all they saw was me, sitting in corners, being ignored. One night, Ravi finally brought it up. We were in the living room. Ananya sat beside him, legs crossed, her expression firm but kind. The kind that makes you feel like a patient in a waiting room rather than someone they love. "Ma," he started, not meeting my eyes. "Ananya and I have been thinking. You've been here a while now, and we just want what's best for you." I waited. There are these elder care homes, nice ones. They have nurses, activities, even gardens. You'll be more comfortable. You won't have to cook or clean. And the kids? Well, they're growing fast. The house is feeling tight. Ananya placed her hand on his and added, "You deserve proper care, Ma. We want to do what's right." I looked at my son, my boy who used to hold my hand crossing roads, who cried when he scraped his knee, who once said he wanted to earn enough to buy me a car. Now here he was, dismissing me like a logistics issue. I didn't argue. I didn't cry. I simply asked, "When were you thinking of this?" "Soon," Ananya replied quickly. "They have a room opening up in 2 weeks, so they had already looked. Toured places, made calls, while I folded their clothes and blessed their children and cooked their food. That night, I took out my old trunk from the bottom of the wardrobe. Inside were letters from my husband, some yellow with time, others newer, written to myself when I missed him too much. I ran my fingers over his last note, dated 3 days before he passed. It read, "Don't let anyone shrink you, Suni. You've always been bigger than any room you're in." The next few days were a blur of slow detachment. I stopped cooking, stopped folding laundry. I wasn't asked to anymore. I overheard Ananya complaining to Ravi, "She just mopes. I feel like she's trying to make us feel guilty." He didn't respond. Or maybe I stopped listening halfway. One morning, I went into the kitchen to make chai. Ananya was already there. She looked at me annoyed and said, "We already had tea. You don't need to make more. The gas bill's high enough." I paused, then put the kettle away. No point forcing yourself into spaces where you're clearly unwanted. That evening, I decided to visit the old flower shop one last time. I took an auto by myself. The new owner was kind. He still kept some of my photos on the wall. Said customers often asked about Sunita Madam and her marigold garlands. I stood there for a long time, inhaling the scent of crushed petals and damp burlap. I remembered who I was there. I was not someone's burden. I was someone who built something with bare hands. Before I left, I noticed an envelope tucked behind a dusty file in the old back cabinet. Inside was the shop's original ownership deed, still in my name. I had forgotten I left it there for safekeeping. Strange how the universe returns things to you when you need them most. Back home, I started going through my old papers, bank passbooks, FDs, post office savings. Slowly, carefully, I began transferring them. The apartment I sold? I still had some of the proceeds in a separate account Ravi never knew about. I also remembered the insurance policy in my husband's name, the one he opened before his last surgery. For rainy days, he had said. The clouds had arrived. I spent one full night writing. Not letters, but instructions, my will, donation papers, names of orphanages, women's shelters, and educational charities I wanted to support. If I was going to disappear from their lives, I wanted to do it with intention. 2 days later, I overheard one final blow, Ananya, again on the phone. I just want the room back, and her constant sighing is making the whole house feel heavy. I swear I'd pay her to leave. I froze, then smiled, because she wouldn't have to. They wanted space, and I was finally ready to give it to them in a way they'd never forget. That night, I couldn't sleep. I sat on the floor by the window, wrapped in my old shawl, watching the shadows shift on the ceiling. The silence of the house wasn't peaceful anymore. It felt like abandonment wearing slippers. I pulled out the small metal box I kept hidden, in the bottom drawer. It wasn't locked. It didn't need to be. No one in this house would bother searching for anything of mine. Inside were pieces of my life no one here had seen. A faded Rocky from my younger brother, the train ticket from my honeymoon, a newspaper clipping of my shop's opening day, and my wedding bangles. One of them cracked. I held them like you'd hold the edges of a dream you didn't want to forget. My thoughts drifted back to the very beginning. I was 19 when I first met Rajiv, my husband. It wasn't a grand romance. It was a quiet understanding. He used to say, "You're not loud, Suni, but your silence has shape. It fills a room." He supported me when I wanted to start the flower shop, even when his own parents said it was foolish. He taught me how to balance ledgers and hold my ground with rude vendors. After he died, I thought I'd never find that kind of steadiness again. But I did, in my son. For a time. I remembered the night Ravi cried into my lap after failing his first college exam. I had stroked his hair and told him, "One failure doesn't define you. What you do next does." He believed me then. He listened. Now he wouldn't. Even look at me when I entered the room. I thought of all the roles I had played in life: daughter, wife, mother, caregiver. And how, with each passing year, those titles faded until all I was to them was extra. A nuisance. A slow, inconvenient shadow in their sunlit world. The memory that broke me came soft, like most painful things do. It was my 50th birthday. Rajiv had passed just 6 months earlier, and I was hollow. That day, Ravi surprised me by coming home from college with a small cake, candles already lit, singing "Happy Birthday" off-key. He made tea. We sat on the floor, just the two of us. He held my hand and said, "I'll never leave you alone, Ma. I promise." That same boy had now labeled me a problem to be solved. Something snapped quietly inside me. Not in anger, not even in sorrow. It was the sound of surrender. I stood up, walked to the mirror, and looked at myself. Truly looked. Wrinkles I hadn't noticed. Eyes dulled by restraint. Shoulders stooped, not from age, but from constantly folding into the background. I said it out loud just once. Enough, and I meant it. I went to the cupboard, pulled out the cloth bag where I kept all my personal documents, and laid everything on the bed. I made a list of what I needed to do and who I needed to become again. Not a burden. Not a grandmother quietly fading into silence, but Sunita Mehra, the woman who once built something from scratch, who raised a child alone, who never begged for respect but earned it in full. In that moment, I knew, if I didn't leave, I'd lose myself completely, and they wouldn't even notice. Have you ever felt invisible in your own home or among your own family? I want to hear your story. You're not alone. They thought I was breaking, but I was only bending to pick up the pieces of the woman they had forgotten I used to be. The next morning, I woke before anyone else. The house was still dark, the world hushed. It was the hour I used to enjoy most, when I would sit on my porch with tea and listen to the birds warming up for the day. Now, that same silence felt like an ally, like it was saying, "Go. You've waited long enough." I didn't waste time. I pulled on my shawl, tucked the folder of documents under my arm, and walked out without a sound. I knew the gate would creak, so I closed it gently, with the care you reserve for something that has held you captive. I took an auto to the city's old part, the place where memories still lived in corners, where my feet knew the uneven footpaths, like old friends, and I went straight to her, Amrita Singh. We had worked side by side in school committees, temple events, and later, briefly, as co-owners of a small floral stall at the annual Diwali Mela. Time had carried us in different directions, but we always exchanged birthday calls and condolence letters. She opened the door, saw my face, and said nothing. Just pulled me into a hug that held decades of unspoken truths. Over steaming cups of ginger tea, I finally spoke. "I'm not here to complain. I'm here to ask for help." She didn't ask questions, didn't prod or pity. She just nodded. "I've been saving," I said quietly, "and I need to start over, somewhere quiet, somewhere far from this." Amrita leaned back, thoughtful. "I have something in mind. Coastal, serene, retired folks, but not a facility. A real home." She took out her laptop and began typing. That afternoon, she drove me to see it, a modest one-story cottage with a tiled roof and green shutters, nestled between a gulmohar tree and a winding lane near the Konkan coast. The gate was rusty and the paint needed work, but the moment I stepped onto the porch, I felt my lungs open wider than they had in years. It didn't smell like antiseptic or fear. It smelled like freedom. "I'll take it," I said before she finished describing the property. Amrita smiled. "I'll fast-track the paperwork." Back home, still invisible in the rhythm of Ravi's house, I quietly began preparing. I took only what belonged to me: my shawl, a few saris, the metal box of memories, my late husband's old watch, and a silver Lakshmi idol from the puja corner. I transferred the last of my savings, finalized the cottage, sold my remaining shares in the shop building. Amrita handled everything discreetly. I wrote my will. I also wrote a letter to the children, one for each grandchild, not to guilt them, just to remind them of our stories. The bedtime tales, the way Meera once braided my hair and said I smelled like mangoes, the time Arjun told me he'd grow up to buy me a castle. I folded the letters gently and left them where I knew they'd be found later, tucked into their old drawing books, and finally, I wrote one last note. "Thank you for reminding me where I didn't belong. I left it on the dining table. No dramatic goodbye, no drawn-out scene." At 4:45 a.m., I stepped outside for the last time. The air was still cool. I looked at the house, not in anger, but with strange clarity, like it had been a stage and the play was finally over. I didn't look back again. By 10 a.m., I was sitting in my new home with Amrita, sipping coconut water on the porch. The ocean murmured in the distance. A man rode by on a bicycle, balancing a basket of fish. Somewhere nearby, temple bells rang like a welcome I hadn't known I needed. That night, I lit a lamp and placed it in the window, not to guide anyone home, but to remind myself, you are here. You made it. You exist beyond what they saw in you. Didn't leave in the dead of night because I was defeated. I left in the light of dawn because it was finally time to rise. I knew they wouldn't call right away. At first, my absence was probably a relief. No more extra plate on the table, no more adjusting the fan speed because I felt cold, no more reminders that someone older and slower still lived among them. For the first 24 hours, I imagine the silence in that house must have felt like victory, but silence has a way of twisting into anxiety. By the third day, I received a call from Ravi's number. I didn't answer. A second call came that evening. Then a message. "Ma, where are you? Please call back." I stared at the screen for a moment, then turned the phone off completely, letting it rest, just like I was learning to rest. For the first time in years, I didn't feel obligated to respond, to comfort, to fix things I didn't break. A week later, Amrita told me she'd gotten a call from Ravi. He had found her name in one of my old contacts and reached out in desperation. "Sounded shaken," she said. "Asked if you were okay, if you'd lost your mind." I smiled gently. "I finally found it, Amrita." Meanwhile, back in that house, things were starting to slip. What they hadn't known, what they hadn't bothered to know, was that the money they casually used for vacations, upgrades, and household expenses didn't all come from Ravi's salary. A significant portion had come from accounts and investments under my name. I had contributed quietly, consistently, and I had removed myself just as quietly. The joint account I had set up after moving in closed. The fixed deposits meant for family emergencies that they used to dip into without informing me liquidated. Even the small education fund I had built in Mira and Arjun's names shifted elsewhere. They didn't see the storm until the ground beneath them started giving way. Ravi called again. Left a voicemail this time. His voice trembled, beneath a forced calm. "Ma, please, I don't know what's going on. Why would you leave like this? The kids are asking about you. We were just trying to help." Help. I almost laughed. A few days later, I received a message from Ananya. A single line. "What do you think you've achieved by running away?" It didn't anger me. It affirmed everything. They weren't worried for me. They were worried about the collapse of the version of me they had constructed. A quiet, convenient woman who wouldn't say no, wouldn't disappear, wouldn't own anything. I walked through my new garden that morning, barefoot, the earth, cool beneath my feet. I had planted hibiscus and basil, given them names, spoke to them every morning like they were old friends returned. I started attending yoga classes with a few other older women in the community. Every evening we drank herbal tea and swapped stories. Some had similar wounds, some had worse. One of them, a retired principal named Leela, looked at me and said, "It takes courage to leave, but even more to stay gone." She was right, because staying gone meant accepting that the people you loved most may never fully love you the way you need. A few weeks later, I received a registered letter forwarded from my old bank branch. It was from Ravi. Inside was a long letter. I could tell he had written it late at night. The handwriting was shaky, the ink uneven. He apologized, not just for suggesting I leave the house, but for not noticing how much you gave. He said he never realized how often I was there when no one else was. How the kids had started asking. Real questions now. Why did Dottie leave? Did she get sick? Was it something we did? I imagined Ravi struggling to answer them. He ended the letter with something that stayed with me for days. "I always thought you'd be there, Ma. Just always there. I never imagined you'd walk away from us." But I hadn't walked away. From them, I had walked back to myself. I didn't reply to his letter. Not out of cruelty, but out of peace. Some lessons are too sacred to be wrapped in explanations. Back in the cottage, I made a cup of tea. The birds had begun to nest under the awning. The sea could be heard in the distance, steady and sure. I sat on the porch and watched the sun melt into the horizon. They weren't unraveling because I left. They were unraveling because I no longer needed to stay. It was a rainy afternoon when he finally showed up. I had just finished drying clothes under the awning when I heard the sound of tires on gravel. I peeked through the window and saw the silver car, still bearing the same sticker Mira had once stuck on the back bumper. My dad's a superhero. The irony was sharp, but not bitter, just quiet. Ravi stepped out slowly, umbrella in hand, looking unsure of his own posture. He stood at the gate for a few seconds, hesitating, then pushed it open and walked up the little path to my porch. I met him at the threshold. He looked older, not in years, but in guilt, in knowing. "Ma," he said softly. I didn't speak. I simply moved aside, letting the door open behind me. He stepped in like he was entering a temple. The house smelled of agarbatti and fresh lemongrass. The walls were painted sea blue. My shawl hung neatly on a hook by the door. The space didn't feel like a widow's retreat or a mother's exile. It felt lived in, loved, whole. He sat at the table, fidgeting with the edge of the cloth. "I didn't know where else to go," he said, eyes downcast. "I thought you might be in a hospital, or angry, or worse." I poured 2 cups of tea and slid one across to him. "I'm neither," I said. "I'm home." He flinched slightly, at the word perhaps. "Ananya doesn't know I came," he said. "She wouldn't understand." I raised an eyebrow. "She understood perfectly well the day she asked you to put me away like old furniture." He opened his mouth to protest, then stopped. Maybe for the first time, he had no defense ready. "I didn't protect you," he admitted. "I should have said something." You should have seen me," I interrupted gently. Silence. He looked around the room, took in the photographs I'd hung up, none of them recent. Most were from the flower shop, some were from his childhood. "Why didn't you tell me how unhappy you were?" he asked. I smiled, not unkindly, because I knew you weren't ready to hear it, and I was tired of whispering where no one was listening. He took a deep breath. "I read your will, so that's what had pushed him here." "I'm not here about money," he said quickly, defensively. I realized how much I took for granted. All those years you worked, saved, gave, I never asked how you managed. I just assumed." "I know," I said. His voice cracked. "I'm sorry, Ma. I don't expect anything from you now. I just wanted to see you, to say it to your face." I let the silence sit for a while. Sometimes truth needs time to settle in a room. "You were my whole world once," I said quietly. "And I still love you, but I can't live in a place where I'm reduced to a shadow." He nodded, wiping his cheek. "I don't want to take your peace," he said. "I just needed to know you were okay." "I am," I said. "I'm more than okay." He stood slowly, looking unsure of whether to hug me or not. I reached out and touched his arm gently. "I forgive you," I said. His eyes welled again, but this time with something softer. "I hope the children remember me kindly," I added. "They do," he said, his voice breaking. "They miss you more than they can say." I nodded. "Then leave those memories intact. Don't bring them here, Ravi, not yet." He hesitated. Then he nodded. I walked him to the door. He paused at the gate, looked back at me and whispered, "Thank you for everything." I gave him a small wave and watched the car pull away, back down the winding road. I didn't feel triumphant. I didn't feel vindicated. I felt clear. Sometimes clarity is the loudest form of justice. That evening, as the rain eased and the sky turned gold, I stepped outside barefoot, letting the last drops kiss my skin. I stood still, arms at my sides, breathing in the sea air like it belonged to me, and it did. I had no revenge in my heart, only truth, only space. And that space was finally mine. I didn't need them to understand me anymore, because I had already become someone who no longer needed to be understood, only to be free. Time doesn't heal everything, but distance gives things the space to breathe. And in that space, something better than healing can grow. Peace. Weeks passed after Ravi's visit. He didn't return, and I was grateful for that. Not because I was angry, but because we both knew too much had been said, and the rest was meant for silence. The cottage slowly transformed into a reflection of who I had always been beneath the dust of years spent trying to please. The walls now wore soft yellow paint. My little garden grew bold with hibiscus, tulsi, and morning glory. I found an old cane rocking chair in the Sunday market and placed it under the gulmohar tree. Every morning, I made tea in a steel pot, added ginger, and poured it into my favorite floral cup, the one Ravi gave me for my 60th birthday, the last gift he gave without obligation. I began teaching again. Not formally, but with purpose. There were a few neighborhood children whose parents struggled to afford tuition. I invited them to my veranda in the evenings. We read poetry, practiced handwriting, and discussed plants and gods and values that no school was teaching them anymore. And somehow, in teaching them how to find their voices, I reclaimed my own. Amrita visited often, bringing guavas or fresh methi and all the gossip from her side of town. We sat for hours, laughing without restraint. I had almost forgotten how laughter could sound when it wasn't measured. Then one morning, as I checked my postbox, I found 2 envelopes with childlike handwriting, one from Meera, one from Arjun. Inside were drawings, simple, pure. Meera had drawn me sitting under a tree, smiling. Arjun's letter read, "Daddy, please come back. Mama says you're not coming, but I think you miss us. I miss your stories and your soft hands." I sat down and cried for the first time in months, not from pain, but from the ache of love that doesn't leave, even when the people around it falter. I didn't reply. Not yet. But I framed the drawings and placed them above the writing desk. Later that week, I finalized my will. The bank manager was surprised at how specific everything was. I donated a large portion to a women's shelter that helped widows reclaim their skills and live with dignity. Another portion went to a local school that focused on educating rural girls. The small remainder, enough for a quiet life, was left to a trust in my name to fund poetry and art programs for senior citizens. I left nothing to Ravi or Ananya, not out of bitterness, but because gifts should be given to those who know how to honor them. The letter I sent to Ananya was only 3 words long. Thank you. Goodbye. No explanation. No emotion, just closure. That evening, I sat on my porch and looked out at the street, bathed in golden light. The neighborhood kids waved as they rode by on their cycles. Somewhere in the distance, a temple bell chimed and a conch blew. I closed my eyes and let the breeze wrap around me like a prayer. In all those years of serving, of silencing my needs, I thought love meant staying, enduring, folding myself smaller to fit inside other people's comfort. But now, I understood. Love doesn't always mean holding on. Sometimes the purest love is letting go of those who cannot carry your truth and choosing instead to carry your own. If you had one chance to say goodbye to someone who hurt you, but never apologized, what would you write in just 3 words? Share below. I no longer needed justice from them, because I had given justice to myself, with every quiet choice, every boundaried goodbye, every moment of peace they never thought I'd find. There's a peculiar kind of strength that comes with being forgotten. It teaches you to remember yourself. I used to think life was measured in roles, wife, mother, grandmother, that if you fulfilled each title with grace, the world would repay you in love. But sometimes the world forgets. People forget, even your own children. What they forget most of all is that behind those titles, there is a person, a woman, with her own heartbeat, her own longings, and her own limits. In the quiet of this little coastal home, I remembered that woman. She was the girl who danced barefoot in monsoon puddles, the young wife who built a business from scratch with trembling fingers and stubborn hope, The mother who stitched school uniforms late into the night, even when her back ached. The widow who didn't crumble, but carried on. And eventually, she became the old woman people stopped seeing, until she chose to vanish, not in defeat, but in decision. Now, every evening, I sit on my porch with a cup of tea, watching the sky change color like an old sari pulled fresh from the sun. I hear the sound of children playing, the rustle of the gulmohar leaves, the whisper of the sea calling no one and everyone. And I smile. Not because everything ended perfectly, but because I ended it with peace, no confrontation, no shouting match, no final, dramatic declaration, just a quiet exit, a gentle reclaiming. I've learned that we are not meant to stay in places where we are merely accepted out of duty. We deserve to be celebrated in our presence, not mourned, only in our absence. To those watching this who have ever felt like a guest in your own home, I see you. To those who've spent decades giving, only to be met with silence, I hear you. And to the quiet women, the caretakers, the peacemakers, the ones who've endured too much for too long, I want to tell you something no one told me. You are not selfish for wanting more. You are not cruel for walking away. You are not weak for needing rest, or space, or dignity. You are enough, even if they never say it out loud, especially then. And no, I don't regret leaving. I don't regret the silence that followed, or the property I sold, or the relationships I let die their natural deaths. Because I didn't leave out of bitterness. I left out of love, for myself. And that, I've learned, is the kind of love that saves you when nothing else will. Sometimes, the strongest thing you'll ever do is walk away from the place that taught you to doubt your worth and build a quieter, gentler world where you never have to ask for it again.